Good morning and welcome to the King's Report for Wednesday, November 15th, 2017, the 8th year of Chungi, the 9th month, and the 27th day of this 9th month by the heavenly calendar. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheonryuk Hyung Moon, and I'm here with Mr. Greg Knoll, entrepreneur and businessman. Troublemaker. Trouble solver, actually, I would say. Let's go to the weather first. It's 26 degrees right now and clear in the Cheonryuk area, in the palace area. And today we're expecting increasing clouds getting up to 46 degrees with cloudy and a little rain tonight going down to 36 degrees. So it's not going to freeze tonight.
Yeah, that's a nice trend.
And it's going to be actually going up to 52 degrees tomorrow with a morning shower. Now, this weekend we're having some events here. This is the True Children's Day and the Day of Opening of Heaven for the Unified World of Heaven and Earth on Saturday. And then we have an Ancestor Liberation and Blessing Ceremony on Sunday. And on Saturday it's going to be going up to 44 degrees, overcast with rain. And then on Sunday, though, it looks like we'll be going up to 45 degrees, partly cloudy, a snow shower. So I think probably when we do the outdoor portion of the liberation ceremony, it should be all right. Yeah, we can, no problem having that little fire out there on the lawn outside the front door. 45 degrees is not so bad.
The king will feel right at home.
Yeah.
Outdoor fire.
Well, I think he would prefer if it were,
in the 30s or 20s.
In the 20s, yes.
Single digits.
Single digits, yes. But can't please everyone. So it looks like we're looking at 45 degrees there. All right, let's go to our Rimas this morning. And in the Bible, I'm in Isaiah chapter 2. You don't read too much of the beginning portion of Isaiah, do we? Yeah.
This one is what, 50? Isaiah
53 is what the king was talking about yesterday, yes, about how it prophesies to Jesus. But this is also a very wonderful prophecy here. It is also prophesying about the very days that we are living in now, the last days. I'm going to read the first 4 verses of Isaiah chapter 2. The word that Isaiah the son of Amoz saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days, that's today, right, that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains.
Wow, there you go.
And shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths.
Wow.
For out of Zion shall come forth the law. Or is it?
Constitution.
The Constitution. And the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people.
Wow.
And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Hallelujah.
Adieu.
Adieu. A lot to talk about in this terms of this Rima.
Yeah.
Of course, the mountain, and in the New Testament also, God says to go to the mountains. And we're told that in the times of trouble to go to the mountains. But here, right now, the Cheonryuk Palace has been established on a mountaintop. Really, it's not such a high mountain. I mean, not exactly the Rocky Mountains, but wouldn't want to live at the top of Pikes Peak anyway, right? But it's a good elevation there, and it looks down on the Delaware River Valley.
On 3 states.
3 states, yeah. You look down there, and you're in Pennsylvania, and right across the Delaware River and to the left is New York State, and then to the right is the state of New Jersey, with their little obelisk there. Here we are. New Jersey is there. And
it's the Appalachian Trail that connects, 15 states.
Something like that, yeah. A whole bunch of states up and down the East Coast, yes. And it's a very good place to have a palace. It really is looking down on the world and on the towns of Matamoros and Port Jervis.
And the sun rises beautifully every morning at the palace.
Yes. Yeah. Well, some days it's cloudy, but many mornings it's. I watch the sun. And it rises, of course, as the days go on, and I'm sitting there, and I actually, when I'm sitting in the King's Report, I'm actually looking at the ridge where the sun rises from, because I'm looking due east, and as time goes on, and from summer into winter, Which way is it going now? Right now it's going this way, I guess. Anyway, it's always
to the right.
It's
As you're
moving to the
looking
right.
at it, it's moving.
Yes,
to the right.
it's moving to the right. And then the other half of the year it's moving to the left. So it's a wonderful place to be. And so, as it says here, to the mountain, and Kukchinim actually received a call from someone saying, "I want to visit your house because I heard that God lives there." Right?
Yeah.
It's the Lord's house. That's no mistake about it. And of course, the street address is 154. That's the same as the time at which a father passed on by the Gregorian calendar, September 3rd, 2012, on the holy calendar, the 7th month, the 17th day.
And the king is leaving his mark.
Yes.
He's landscaping it.
Yes.
Really
very
making
much so.
it a beautiful, holy, holy temple, a holy
very
palace.
much so. Yes. Many people will go and come, let us go up the mountain of the Lord to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways. So many people are going up there, aren't they?
That's right.
And they're learning of his ways.
Yeah, you don't even have to go there. You can just tune in. Learn his ways.
Or people also go there on a couple days a week to learn jiu-jitsu and martial arts.
Mm-hmm. Peace police, peace
and
militia.
we will walk in his paths.
Mm-hmm.
For out of Zion shall go forth the law. Of course, the law, yes, the Chunuk Constitution, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations. And the Chunuk Constitution, it is a world government, but it is not a centralized world government. Mm-hmm. It is a decentralized world government. It is a kingdom of kings, as our second king often says. It's a kingdom of kings. If you think about it, it has to be, because you can't have a king of kings unless you have lots of kings.
That's right.
If you have only one king, you can't call him king of kings.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of kings. We all have our...
Sorry.
You're not wearing yours.
I'm going to go get it.
Woe be unto... There are lots of kings. There are lots of kings. And sovereignty is decentralized. And we have sovereignty. We don't give up our sovereignty. The crowns represent sovereignty. The guns represent sovereignty, and that's why they are so important in building the kingdom of God. And the Chunuk Constitution is designed to keep the central government small. One way in which it does that is to limit the total revenue of the government to 10% of GDP, which is plenty to run the country on. If a lot of the functions that are currently performed by the government are transferred to the private sector, which they originally were. When the United States first began, things like education were in the private sector. Universities such as Harvard and Yale were not started by the government. They were started by religious organizations, actually, by churches. Princeton as well, these Ivy League schools, and the social welfare was not done by the government. It was done by churches and other private institutions, and even infrastructure projects were most of the time done in the private sector. I like to give the example of because it's one that's near here, of the Delaware and Hudson Canal. Later on became the Delaware and Hudson Railroad Company, but the canal, they wanted to, after the War of 1812, it became difficult to import coal from England, and so they wanted to export the anthracite coal here in Pennsylvania, northeast Pennsylvania, to New York. Going to Philadelphia was easy because you got rivers that go down to New York, but going to New York was difficult because it didn't have roads. This was before railroads, and you had a couple of mountain ranges that you had to cross, and the roads were terrible. So they said, okay, well, let's build a canal. And if there's no need to build that canal today, but if there were a need, you can bet 100% that the first step would be to hire lobbyists and go to Congress and get government money. That would be that's the natural way. That's just that's just common sense. That's how you do things today. Mm-hmm. But in the early 19th century, that was not how they did things. The folks who wanted to build that canal went to Wall Street and they sold stock. They sold $1 million worth of stock. And the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company became the first company in America to be capitalized at $1 million. And its headquarters was in Honesdale. Yeah?
There you go.
It was the Google of the time. The biggest company in America. The biggest, the most capital in America. And actually the first president was Mr. Hones, I think. And that's why it's called Honesdale.
Okay.
Yeah, or Hone or Hones or something like that. But anyway, they named it after him. And they built this canal from northeast Pennsylvania, from this area, to a point on the Hudson River, approximately where Kingston is today, I think just south of Kingston, I believe. And so they took the coal by barges there, and then they, of course, went down the Hudson River to New York City. And that's how they got coal from northeast Pennsylvania to New York City. Now, through much of the early 19th century, canals, especially in the eastern United States, well, at that time, eastern United States was basically the whole United States. Canals were the main sort of mode of sort of industrial transportation. A lot of canals were being built. And then later on, the railroad came into play. And so then that's how the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company became the Delaware and Hudson Railroad Company. But anyway, the canal existed until near the end of the 19th century. And then guess what? It went out of business. If it were built by government, we'd still have that canal, and we'd still be paying for it. Oh no, it's a matter of national security that we have to keep this canal going. I bet you we'd still be paying for it if it had been done by the government.
Yeah.
You can bet it would be. Doesn't matter how inefficient it is. It would still be there. And we'd be paying for it with our tax dollars. But we're not. When railroads came along and eclipsed the use of canals, because railroads provided a much more efficient means of transportation, the canal went out of business. And that's how it happens in the private sector, but not in the government sector, though. Not in the public sector. Once you start a program, it takes on a life of its own. So anyway, that's why the Cheonryu Constitution limits the government, and it talks here about beating swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn no more. Because you have a king. You have a king who is a judge, and it says here, he shall judge. He will. Where does it say? He shall judge among the nations. Yeah, because the king is above the Supreme Court in Cheonryu Constitution. And then when you go to the Supreme Court, makes a decision on something, but then also there's an option to appeal the case to the king, because the king as the inheritor and representative body of the King of Kings, true father, and each, second king, third king, fourth king, fifth king, so on, in that particular generation will be the inheritor and representative body of true father and of God. And so then from that position, they will have the final say, and as the judge, because the Messiah, after all, is one of his role is that of a judge, as of a judge. And so that is why then these disputes among nations can be resolved through the system, the judicial system of the Cheonryu Constitution, which finally ends up in the hands of the king himself.
Another cultural aspect that the king brings through the Constitution and through the culture of Cheonggyeolguk that Father espoused was the fact that we're all meant to be kings and queens. We're all meant to true peace comes through strength.
Yes.
And it doesn't come through the predator class rising up as we currently have in the fallen world, where the kings are the ultimate predators feeding upon the masses, the sheep, and there are no more sheepdogs. So there was a beautiful quote that the king came up with the other morning, if you don't mind if I could read it.
Sure.
So, what is peace police, peace militia? And this is really the culture that the king is bringing at the palace on top of the mountain.
Yes.
It is you and I. Love God and love your neighbor. Be willing to lay down your life to protect another. We are sheepdog who stand up against wolves and to protect the sheep. We are citizens of the kingdom of God who will forever keep keep at bay devils, dictators, and tyrants. We are the inheritors of the kingdom of God, co-heirs with Christ. With our crowns and rods of iron, we take sovereignty and responsibility to the next level. I am peace police, peace militia.
Aju.
Signed by the second king.
There you go. Yeah, that's wonderful.
So that's really how peace comes about in the kingdom, is by each individual sovereign king and queen rising up, taking their rightful position as co-heirs with Christ. And there is no place for tyrants, dictators, and bullies, and gang members, and all these low-level predators, all the way up to the highest level of predators. They just do not have a chance to survive in that culture. And that's really where how true, lasting peace comes about.
Yes, when good people stand up, tyrants and bullies and the evil people have to sit down.
Yep.
Let's go into our Cheonsonggyong Rima. We're spending a lot of time because God has given us some wonderful rimas this morning.
I do. And
in the Bible and also in the Cheonsonggyong as well. I'm in the book on true families, on true family, chapter 6, and just reading the first few paragraphs of chapter 6. We might say that marriage, this is the significance of marriage. It's a wonderful, wonderful passage here. We might say that marriage is a ceremony that allows us to open the door of the palace of happiness and enter in. Therefore, marriage is a great event for humankind. Love transcends time and space and is the greatest thing for humankind. Marriage is the ceremony that reveals and confirms this great love. Why do we refer to marriage ceremony by saying receive the blessing? According to the principle, if Adam and Eve had not fallen and had become mature, they would have stood in the position to receive the blessing. In other words, if God becomes a subject partner, Adam and Eve become his substantial object partners. We know the blessing is realized as we perfect our individual character and get married on the foundation that can connect God as the subject partner of love to the love of the object partner. After all, maturity leads to marriage, and marriage leads to the appearance of God's love. If there were no marriage, love would not have started in the human world. Who is the owner of that love? We should realize that the owner is not a human being, but God. When God's love appears among us, it becomes God's joy and pride, and we experience this as God's love. Love cannot be realized alone. It is only realized through a reciprocal relationship. Therefore, a man cannot realize love by himself alone. The same can be said of a woman. When Adam and Eve finally unite through love, they can receive God's love. From this viewpoint, we can understand that the human beings are born from God. This is on page 468. Is that 5 or? I'm trying to confirm that. Anyway, I believe it's 468, yes. Yes, 468. I'm especially attracted to this, drawn to this point that that love cannot be realized alone. This is one of the things that really I've I feel a very profound thing that I've learned from Father, that love cannot be realized alone. I never really thought of it that way before. And even God cannot realize love alone. I think this is something that when you mention it to Christians, they kind of think, wow, he's perfect. And our understanding of perfection needs to be, we need to think a little more deeply. For one thing, and wansong is the Korean word, and sometimes it's translated as completion, sometimes it's perfection, and we go back and forth because we don't know which it really is. Probably, and then if you were to look it up in a Korean dictionary, complete, wansong is more complete. This is a complete object. Someone has completed it. Now, if you say it's perfect, that's something different, right? Mm. But this is in other words, it's ready to be sold. Someone's taken some parts and put it together, and it's ready to be sold.
It could be used for its intentional purpose.
Right, for intended purpose. Yeah, that would be a completed object, you could say, a completed item in Korean, wansong. So, but in principle, of course, you go through the growing period, and then through that period, we become completed. Mm-hmm. I think that's a better way of understanding it rather than as perfected.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think of God as but also 완전 then is more closer to perfect, and but even God, we say, cannot experience love by himself. Does that make him imperfect? But he made it that way. That's the way he created it. That's how he wanted it.
And if we fulfill our purpose,
Yes.
which is really entering into a full relationship with God, then not only do we become complete, but God also becomes complete. And it's that reciprocal relationship.
Yes. And this is what drives Christians up the wall. That we make God complete.
Vulnerable, yeah.
That God is a vulnerable God.
Yes. That's the great revelation of our true Father.
Yes. But if you think of it, yeah, it has to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of it, that is the greatness of God's creation. That, and you know, Christians do say, okay, God sent his only son to die on the cross. So in that sense, I guess they can, there is a condition for them to recognize that God is vulnerable, since they believe that way, that he would send his only son to die on the cross for the sins of humanity. So that would give a kind of a sense of vulnerability there. But to say that God originally planned it, that this was his original creation, that he planned it so that he would be vulnerable.
And to make that a real personal situation. Some people can identify Jesus doing that to God, but all of us are meant to have that intimacy and vulnerability with God.
Yes. But I think we have a hard time with it because we ourselves don't like to be vulnerable. Because when we're vulnerable, we feel that we are in danger.
That's true.
You know, and we need to
protect ourselves.
We need to become invulnerable.
Right. Hard.
We want our houses to be invulnerable. You know? We want to have bulletproof windows and doors and walls and you know, and even if flood comes, we want to be able to keep the water away. And earthquakes, we want houses to be invulnerable. We want our countries to be invulnerable. We don't want it to be under the danger of a foreign attack. So vulnerable is, we have a very negative thing of connotation to that. But I think it's the vulnerability that gives us the ability to relate to others. Mm-hmm. If I don't need anyone, in other words, if I am so invulnerable that I don't have a need to rely on anyone, then what is the basis for me to relate to people? Mm-hmm. If I can produce all my own food and all my own water and my sunlight too, you know, everything, I don't need anybody. Why did God create everybody else? All he had to do was create me. That's not the kind of world that God wants. He wants us all to be vulnerable, and he himself to be vulnerable, in a way that we rely on each other, and he relies on us, and we rely on him. That's a pretty beautiful world, I think. And God is not some people say, I hate God because he is a dictator up in the sky, or at least that's the Christian God, and I don't like that kind of God. But that's not the God that Father teaches, is he? Father teaches a God who is vulnerable and who has been suffering and who has been in sorrow, and the way Mr. Sudo used to teach in his workshops was that God is in the pit of hell. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to meet God, you have to go to the pit of hell.
And Father often talked about God's heart being frozen and kind of maybe invulnerable because of the sin of human beings.
Yes.
And we all have this sacred responsibility to unthaw God's heart and to lift God out of this hell and enter into a beautiful relationship with him, where his true vulnerability can really come out in relationship to each of us.
And in marriage we are vulnerable to each other, aren't we?
That's right. And a lot of times,
we learn to be vulnerable.
That's right.
Yeah, because if you want a marriage to succeed, you have to make yourself vulnerable. Yeah. Isn't that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's true.
If you try to be invulnerable in marriage, you're not going to get very far. you're not going to get very far.
And the king's been, really good at pointing out how Satan wants to destroy that vulnerability.
Yes.
And to create this cold and callous relationship that ultimately leads to divorce and the breakdown of the family.
Yes. Yes. And the king teaches martial arts, but he also teaches that as people become more advanced in the martial arts, they become more aware of their vulnerability and they become more mature in their thinking. That's actually an important thing as well. That's an important byproduct of learning martial arts. Okay. All right, let's take a break now, and we'll go through some of the news when we come back.
Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Wednesday, November 15th, 2017. And we have a problem. There's a fight or a civil war between Drudge and Breitbart. Usually these two sites are pretty much, conjunction with each other. But not the last couple of days over this situation in Louisiana.
Alabama?
Alabama, I'm sorry, yes, Alabama. Drudge's headline is Republicans bail on Judge Moore, spiritual battle, Dems set for Alabama win. So Drudge is basically going now saying that, even the polls that Drudge quotes has Moore, the Republican candidate who's been accused of sexual misconduct almost 40 years ago, having him basically going down. Breitbart, however, says Moore alive. Leads 49-43 in new poll. Plurality say allegations make them more likely to vote for Judge. So who's right? I guess we'll find out.
Well, I think Moore is Bannon's boy,
yes.
So he's just not ready to give up on him yet.
Yes.
Doesn't want to be wrong.
Yes. Bannon of course, is the executive chairman of Breitbart News, and Breitbart News is very much kind of his. It's kind of his media outlet, actually.
Yeah, I think he's got a fair amount of control there.
Yes, he does have a fair amount of control there. Yeah, and I think the people who work there seem to have a great deal of respect for him as well.
Yeah.
Probably for good reason. But right now there is this disagreement between Drudge and Breitbart, and we'll have to see what happens when the election. I think it's on December 2nd, isn't it? We'll have to see what happens there. What kind of a judgment the people of Alabama will give.
And isn't there talk of Sessions maybe going in there in the final moments and putting his name on the ballot?
Well, there's an idea that not him putting the name on the ballot, but there being a write-in for Jeff Sessions.
Which would take away from Moore's voting.
Moore, yes. And probably, I don't know how. Do they really think that Sessions can win? But then who would then be the Attorney General? Then what is that? That would be, whoa, it's all kinds of, but anyway, let that play out. Let that play out.
Let a few days pass.
Yes. Let the free market operate there for a while, and we'll see what happens there.
Well, I think there was talk about getting rid of Sessions because he wasn't doing his job anyways.
Yeah.
He should go back to Alabama, maybe.
Yeah. And when someone said that, then he says, "Oh, a special counsel for Hillary too." Suddenly he's
back in the game now.
No, don't send me back to Alabama. All right, let's go to the one that you were mentioning during the break. Half over 65 take at least five drugs a day. Are you over 65?
No,
I am.
Not yet.
But you know what? I don't take any drugs.
Wow, you are
a day. Yeah, I mean there are certain drugs that I take on an occasional basis. But there's no drug that I take on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So anyway, this does not apply to me, but all the other guys out there, I will read this for you. Okay, almost half of over 65s in England, this is about England, are taking at least 5 different drugs a day, a Cambridge University study has found. The figure has risen from 12% 20 years ago, while the proportion of taking no pills at all dropped from around 20% in the late 1990s to just 7% today.
You're in that 7% category.
Well, if I were English, yes. I don't know what the percentage is in the U.S. Maybe it's similar.
Yeah,
Researchers tracked more than 15,000 older people who took part in 2 long-term health studies, which began in the 1990s. Some of those who took part in the long-term investigation said they were up to 23 tablets every day. Good heavenly days. I can't even imagine that.
My mom was over 36 pills a day.
Wow. Researchers expressed concern at the increasing dependence on prescription and over-the-counter medicines known as polypharmacy. Studies show polypharmacy can increase the dangers of interactions between different drugs and the risk of frailty in older patients.
This is what happened to my mom, and it happens to a lot of people, and it's kind of the dirty little secret that nobody talks about is that when it's like a cocktail of drugs in your body, and your body doesn't really know how to, these are very complex chemicals in a very delicate ecosystem, and the body oftentimes reacts to this invasion of foreign substances through dizziness and through all sorts of side reactions. And what happened to my mom, and it happens to millions of people, is she got dizzy, from all this cocktail of medical pharmaceuticals in her body. She fell over, she hit her head, and 2 weeks later she's gone. This is a medical death, that is, they have documented as the 3rd leading cause of death behind heart disease, cancer. Then the next is medical death, which is part of the medical deaths are hospitals and medical mistakes, but also pharmaceutical
I think Ron
reactions.
Panzer was saying something like, what was it, in the hundreds, I think it was 300,000 or something like that, medical deaths a year, something like that.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah. It's huge. And of course, it depends on how you categorize it. But if you put in negative reactions of pharmaceuticals in the body, then it's number 3, 3rd leading cause of death. So it's really it's a dangerous world to go down. So you're in a good place where you're not taking any. But once you start taking one, doctors are constantly pushing.
If my former physician is listening, I'm sorry. I know you put me on Lipitor. I stopped taking it. I'm okay. So anyway, she'll probably what are you doing? But yeah. Anyway, yeah. So 7% are not taking any. Maybe some of us should be taking. I don't know. Some doctors would say that we should be taking at least 4 or 5.
Well, yeah, that's their job. They are the modern drug dealers. Their mission really is not to think how the body can be healed naturally, but more how can the body be managed by pharmaceuticals.
Yes. This was my first job out of college. Before I joined the Unification Church, was as a pharmaceutical representative.
Oh, really? Oh,
we were not called that then. We were called medical detail men.
Okay.
And we were all men. There was not a single woman in the industry. It was later on that they started hiring women. But my job was to go around to doctors and to, I worked for a pharmaceutical company, and we had a drug, which I still think is a good drug. It was a diuretic. It made you pee, basically, and it was used. Anyway, it was used for hypertension, for high blood pressure, and other things. And so I would take these scientific studies, many of which had been course, sponsored by my company or other pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
And I would take these and I would go there and say, see, our drug really works well. So you need to prescribe our drug to more patients.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to take them to lunch or do a lunch presentation? That's usually how it's done today.
I didn't work that long.
Okay.
God saved me from that position after a few months. But I probably would have done that if I'd worked there longer. Yes.
Yeah, that's how it's done today.
Yeah.
The people in your position would go in and say, "Hey, I'm gonna cater a very nice lunch for you. You don't even have to leave your office. Invite your entire staff to the lunchroom or wherever. Sometimes to a hotel." And then the doctor and his assistants and the medical staff all come and they get fed a wonderful lunch at your expense, at the company's expense, of course. So it's a free lunch, and then they listen for a half hour, 45 minutes about how wonderful your drug is, and then they go back. So that's...
I was when I was doing it, we were told to go in there. We would take a paper into the doctor's office. We would talk to the receptionist and the nurse, and a nurse would give us time. Of course, we'd give samples, we'd give samples, and I had a bag that was full of samples and papers, and we'd go in and we'd talk to the doctor and say, da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, he's a doctor, right, with a medical degree, right? I have a BA in international relations, right? So, and the doctor knows this, so he's very, very skeptical. What is this guy trying to tell me about? Of course, I went through a 2-week workshop on our drug. And I took a test at the end of that, and they said, "Okay, you know your stuff. Now go out and sell it." Yeah. So anyway, that was my first job.
It's incredibly challenging to get the attention of a doctor.
It is,
because they are very busy people,
yeah.
And every minute is worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars toward their salary, and so
that's true. Yes.
So it's almost impossible to get time with the doctor, and that's why these lunches have come about, because they got to take time to eat. So the theory is if they'll sit down and eat and listen to you, but otherwise forget about trying to go in probably the way you did it years ago But hundreds of pharmaceutical companies are all fighting for the doctor's time,
and that's why they no longer hire me, but they hire beautiful ladies instead.
That's right.
Because most of the doctors are men.
Right.
Yeah. But I will say that some doctors I discovered do need education. And even I was able to educate one doctor on a point where I believe I may have saved a person's life because he had not really read up on our medicine. And he was prescribing it at a certain dosage without realizing that the FDA had cleared it for a much higher dosage. So he had a patient, and he was prescribing what he thought was the maximum dosage, and the patient was dying, and he was saying, "Okay, well, can't do anything more." And when I went in and started giving my spiel, blood went out of his face, and he's turning white. And he said, "Just a minute," and he picked up the phone and called a colleague and said, "This guy's saying this drug can be prescribed at da-da-da-da-da." And the guy on the other end said something, and he literally ran out of the office, left me there, and went to the hospital. I don't know what happened after that. I hope I saved someone's life. But, so some doctors, what I've discovered is that you got young doctors who don't have so much experience, but they're just out of medical school, and they got a lot of knowledge. You have older doctors who have a lot of experience, but haven't necessarily kept up on their knowledge. That's what I learned by having that job. Yeah. So you have to be aware that there are these two kinds of doctors.
My number one criticism of the medical world is that they prescribe pharmaceuticals, and it gives the patient this kind of like a permission slip to not really change their fundamental ways in which they approach life, whether it be stress-related or diet-related.
Absolutely.
And this pill is a panacea.
Right, and my doctor even told me that when she described Lipitor to me.
Right.
I know you're not going to change your diet.
Exactly.
So here you go.
Right. It's a defeatist attitude.
Yes.
It's a negative attitude toward the patient that this worthless soul can't begin to change his ways. So I'm going to give him this drug.
Yes.
And actually, it doesn't really help.
Yes.
It makes things worse in the long run.
Yes. So anyway,
and the reality is doctors don't know anything about health and nutrition really. They don't really study that in medical school. They study about drugs and procedures. And I think it's the average medical doctor has 3 credits toward nutrition. Very minuscule. For 8 to 10 years of medical education, they receive 3 credits worth of nutrition and natural health education.
Let's go through some of the other. Are we
Yes.
through chastising the doctors
Yes.
now? Okay, yes. NBC exec fired for inappropriate conduct with more than one woman.
Isn't this taking I really like Joe Watson's video, that it's really taking on a dangerous turn where allegations become truth. Allegations become the reason to bring somebody down, like Judge Moore, where there's been no trial, and now this guy, we don't know him enough, but his entire career is now in jeopardy. And just so people could easily collude and come up with stories about some kind of sexual impropriety and really destroy somebody's lifelong work. I think this is very dangerous. I'm not sure what the answer is, but...
Well, it started actually, I think, on colleges or universities where you would have female students alleging rape, and then there would be kind of a rape court or some kind of court in the university. In almost all of these cases, they would find the defendant guilty. So that seems now it's sort of expanded out into the society in general. And I saw an article on that a few days ago. I was trying to find it, but I don't see it. But so this goes back a few years. But yeah, there is this situation now, and also I think Paul Joseph Watson was talking about how, or the King was talking about how this has been co-opted by the feminist movement to try to revive the feminist movement, sort of saying that all men are responsible.
Right.
If one man sins, all men are. Hey, Adam, all right, with his sin we all sin, but I don't think it applies to today. All right, so
and women are not
right. Yes,
guiltless.
women are.
Yeah. They
sinless,
they play
born
a role.
sinless.
They play a role in all of this.
They're all the only begotten daughters. Report: Ariana ignored sex claims at HuffPo at the Huffington Post. Ah, boy. Well, this is kind of a tidal wave that is washing across American culture right now, and we'll see how far it goes. White Thanksgiving, snow forecast for D.C. Well, I looked at our forecast. There's no snow. We've already had our snow. Scientists tried gene editing inside person for first time. To a new constitution, genetically modified organisms don't have human rights. Just keep that in mind. China urged to stop using electroshock therapy to convert gays. Shall we go with that?
This is the China that everybody loves.
Yes. China really has now their Vision 2050. Their Vision 2050. This is what Xi Jinping laid out at the recent 19th Party Congress. That by 2050, he laid it out in 2 stages, 2035 and then 2050, that by 2050 Japan will be China will be the paramount country in the world, surpassing the United States. He didn't necessarily spell it out that way, but it was definitely implied in that 3.5-hour speech that he gave. And they have their worldview, and as the King has often pointed out, you don't have human rights without the Judeo-Christian God.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, people forget. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they said, I think it should be mandatory to say communist China.
Yes.
When you say China. You can't just say China alone. You have to say communist China.
All right. Because we also have free China on Taiwan. Yes.
Right.
On the island of Taiwan.
Yeah, that's a serious misstep, because that word communist implies a lot toward their worldview and how they look at freedom, how they view religious rights, and a whole slew of things.
But China is obviously a centrally controlled dictatorship. It's a one-party dictatorship, and they have gotten rid of socialist economics and brought in capitalism instead, but kept the political dictatorship aspect of communism. And the two are not going to go together.
No.
The two just are not going to go together. So at some point, China is going to collapse, but in the meantime, a lot of people are going to suffer, and they will cause a great deal of suffering in the world.
Cook Jim said not too long ago, the only hope for China is if the individual states, countries, provinces begin to rebel.
Yes.
And begin to break up this monopoly, this governmental monopoly.
Well, right now, China, as I understand, is divided up into 8 military districts, and each of those districts has a considerable degree of autonomy, at least until now. I don't know, Xi Jinping may be decreasing that autonomy now, but there is a certain amount of autonomy. Of course, the thing about Chinese military is that they have their own businesses. For example, they sell weapons to other countries.
Oh, really? You mean each of those 8
Yeah.
blocks?
They can create their own weapons, or if they somehow buy their weapons from someplace, then they can sell those weapons sometimes. And anyway, they have their own businesses that they use to fund their own military. So they have that gives them a certain degree of autonomy. And so I think one analyst in Japan was predicting that that China would break up into these 8 districts, or maybe a combination of 8 or something like that. We'll have to see. But I know it's going to break up. But the process is going to be difficult and tough. A lot of people are going to get hurt in the process, and that's the sad part. And here it says that let's just read the summary of this article on this here. The psychiatrist told my mom homosexuality, just like all the other mental diseases like depression, anxiety, or bipolar, it can be cured. Trust me, leave him here. He's in good hands. This was a person said this in March 16, 2017. Homosexuality is neither a crime nor officially regarded as an illness in China. For decades, the legal status of consensual same-sex activity between men was ambiguous, but that was cleared up in the revised Criminal Code of 1997. In 2001, the Chinese Society of Psychiatry removed homosexuality from its list of mental disorders. This is consistent with the consensus of global medical associations that homosexuality is not a medical condition. However, public hospitals and private clinics in China continue to offer so-called conversion therapy, which aims to change an individual's sexual orientation. On the false assumption they say false assumption, that almost on the assumption that homosexuality is a disorder that needs to be remedied. So this publication is very much a pro-homosexual publication. I don't know if electrical shock therapy is really the way to go, but certainly in God's ideal, any sexual relationship outside of a monogamous heterosexual marriage is the fall and is against God's will. And so that we need to keep that in mind. And that applies to everyone, regardless of what gender you may think you are or what orientation you think you are. I mean, it's like if I were to hold up this thing and say, "This is a cup of hot coffee." It's not, but if I say it is, I choose to identify this as a cup of hot coffee. That's my choice. It's not going to change reality, right? So I can call it anything I want. I can call it orange juice or whiskey or whatever, but it's just water. So,
but when you think about the sexual ethics, the way God created, male and female play equally really important roles in propagating the seed and the lineage of God, and that can only happen through male and female.
Yes.
And the whole absolute sex teaching is profound.
Yes, and the rima that we had this morning about marriage, about the give and take of love within marriage, and then how God can be there. Then that's how it's designed. That's how the world is designed. That's how the world is designed.
Yeah. I think it is revealing when, the King has talked about this before, that in homosexual relations. It's a very promiscuous culture where the average homosexual is, having 300 different partners in the course of a lifetime. That's extremely promiscuous, and all sorts of sexually transmitted diseases, and of course HIV is the result of that kind of promiscuous behavior. It's not God's judgment necessarily. It's just behavior that brings about a huge amount of problems, both socially and physically.
Let's jump to this one that sort of pops out at me. Congresswoman says $50 million in taxpayer-funded settlements, and this is for congressional sexual harassments. So there's a lot of sexual harassment apparently going on within the halls of Congress. Well, I don't know if they're actually in the halls, but among sort of people involved in Congress. And taxpayer money is being doled out to settle these cases. Representative Jackie Spear, Democrat of California, Democrat, all right, so you got to believe her, informed NBC's Chuck Todd on Tuesday that $50 million in taxpayer money had been paid out over the years to settle sexual harassment suits filed against members of Congress.
Frustrating. Once again, our taxpayer dollars at work.
But again, this that is frustrating. That is bad. It shouldn't happen. But we wonder, what is the motive of Jackie Spear, Democrat of California, for revealing this? Anyway, she's going to use this information as some kind of a weapon. Weapon for what? Earlier in the day, Spear testified in front of the House Administration Committee that 2 members of Congress, a Republican and a Democrat, have engaged in sexual harassment in the past. Todd asked Spear about her allegations of sexual harassment and what she believes her responsibility is in going public with that information. Well, it's my responsibility to address the seriousness of the issue. These survivors are subject to a non-disclosure agreement. I'm not going to violate their own non-disclosure agreement, Spear responded. I think moving forward, we have got to take steps to make sure that there is transparency, that in fact the harasser is going to have the settlement paid out of the U.S. Treasury and have all the taxpayers paying for it. It should be something that is paid for by the individual. Hey, that's a novel idea. Have them pay their own sexual harassment settlements.
Again, you have this predator class moving up the political ranks, and of course they're going to harass, sexually harass, and
power
intimidate
corrupts
people. Yeah,
and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
But what this is going to lead to is a huge amount of political correctness within Washington, which there already is the height of political correctness in terms of sensitivity training and all of this, and everybody's going to be walking on eggshells.
Todd followed up by asking Spear if taxpayer money has been used to protect the identities of these members of Congress. One member of Congress has settled a claim, and there has been a taxpayer settlement, Spear had told Todd. So, but there is a problem here also, because on the one hand they're saying that if Moore is elected, they're not going to seat him. Meanwhile, they're using taxpayer money to cover up their own indiscretions.
It's a mess.
Todd asked Spear if
it's also going to have a dampening effect on those who want to enter politics.
And that is a good thing.
Well, unfortunately, good people, we
need more good people in the private sector.
Yeah, good people in the private sector, and maybe good people in the local government levels.
Yes.
But we do need people to function on the federal level, and you kind of have to almost be insane now in the climate the way it is, where you just got to be super squeaky clean. Where there can be, but even if you're squeaky clean, allegations can still be made against you.
You know, I think this is one sort of lesson that the Democrat/Republican duopoly establishment is teaching us through the Moore thing, that hey, we've got dirt on all you guys, and anytime you get uppity, we're ready to use it against you. Now we're going to dig out stuff from 40 years ago. I don't know about you 40 years ago. Me 40 years ago, there's some stuff back there.
Some old dusty skeletons.
So yeah. So, I mean, I think, they're giving us a warning for all of us.
It's surprising keep in line. Even Trump, they tried to bring out stuff, right?
Yes.
To bring him
and
down.
If they couldn't, they made it up. Yeah.
They made it up, and I think that's the fear going forward, is that people can easily make stuff up if they strongly disagree. If they get paid enough money under the table, enough cash is transferred, then
and enough Washington Post reporters come to your house and convince you to go public. Yeah.
And here's a little envelope for you. Just keep it quiet.
Yeah.
And that unfortunately could be the result of a lot of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you do have the right to know, but right now, under the system, you don't have a right to know, Spear informed Todd. We do know that there's about $15 million that has been paid out by the House on behalf of harassers in the last 10 or 15 years. Todd seemed flabbergasted by the amount of money that had been paid out over the last 10 to 15 years. And this is, so we don't have the right to know who they are. The people who elected them.
And we pay for them.
The people who, not only that, we don't get to vote them out of office.
Yeah.
That's definitely
that's not high noon.
A problem. That is definitely not high noon. And I hope that Todd Spear, this is what, NBC, do you think NBC will dig deeper on this and find out who they are? We'll have to wait and see.
I think so. It seems to be, it starts in Hollywood and now it's going outward.
To Washington? Yeah.
I think Washington.
All roads lead to Washington, as the king says.
Yep, that's the part of the deep swamp. And I think it's probably going to become, this is the beginning, I think, of an unraveling in Washington.
All right, let's take a break and we'll come back in a minute or so with more news from a Chundy Group perspective.
Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Wednesday, November 15th, 2017. And I'm trying to open a story here about Venezuela because there are two stories about Venezuela. One is that doom and gloom, and the other is don't worry. It's important to see who is saying doom and gloom and who is saying don't worry. The Wall Street Journal is the doom and gloom one. Venezuela goes bust is the opinion piece that they have in this morning's paper. Another lesson in the price of lending to a socialist regime is the subhead. And Milton Friedman once joked that if you put the government in charge of the Sahara Desert in 5 years, there would be a shortage of sand. He could have been talking about Venezuela and all its oil wealth, but it's no joke. See, Venezuela has the highest, the largest amount of oil reserves in the world,
and the infrastructure already there.
Yes, and the infrastructure there to harvest it. And their people are starving.
Yeah, absolute insanity.
And they can't pay their debts. On Monday, Caracas missed interest payments due on 2 government bonds and 1 bond issued by the state-owned oil monopoly. See, there's the problem, that word, oil monopoly, known by its Spanish initials, PDVSA. Venezuela owed creditors $280 million, which it couldn't manage even after a 30-day grace period. Venezuela is broke, which takes some doing. For much of the second half of the 20th century, a gusher of oil exports made dollars abundant in Venezuela, and the country imported the finest of everything. There were rough patches in the 80s and 90s, but by 2001, Venezuela was the richest country in South America.
Wow.
Then in 2005, the socialist Hugo Chavez declared that the central bank had excessive reserves. He mandated that the executive take the excess from the bank without compensation. Today, the central bank has at best $1 billion in reserves. Falling oil prices are partly to blame, but the main problem is that Chavismo has strangled entrepreneurship. Faced with expropriation, hyperinflation, price controls, and rampant corruption, human and monetary capital has fled Venezuela. By Tuesday evening, the Investment Swaps and Derivatives Association still had not declared Venezuela in default. That matters because this will trigger the insurance obligations inherent in the credit default swaps, but S&P Global Ratings declared the country in default Monday. On Tuesday morning, the Luxembourg Stock Exchange issued a suspension notice for all bonds with missed payments. President Nicolas Maduro has formed a commission to restructure up to $150 billion of debt and put Vice President Tarek El-Aissami, who is under U.S. sanctions for drug trafficking, in charge. What can go wrong? Mr. Al-Aissami called a meeting of creditors on Monday in Caracas, which most bondholders did not attend. Press reports that Mr. Al-Aissami delivered a monologue on Venezuela's intention to pay and took no questions. He argued that the Trump administration's sanctions make it difficult for the dictatorship to arrange refinancing. The real problem is that restructuring assumes the country can grow again. That's nearly impossible without a change in policy that will free the economy. If Caracas doesn't find a way to settle with bondholders, they will soon ask authorities to seize Venezuelan assets such as oil shipments at sea and Citgo facilities in the U.S. Such are the wages of socialism. Do you know if you buy gas at Citgo, you're actually funding the Venezuelan government?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but, wait just a minute. China disagrees. China says Venezuela can appropriately handle its debt load. Reuters.
I'm sure China will bail them out, perhaps.
Yes. Absolutely. And this is part of China's 2050 vision.
That's right. To
replace the world financial system with their own. Mm-hmm. And this is why they haven't yet quite done it, but they're now working on creating a situation where people can buy, they will buy oil with their own currency, with the yuan. And then people say, well, what do I want yuan for? And they say, well, next door we have this gold exchange. You can take it over there and buy gold with it. So then you can take gold home with you.
This is a prime opportunity for China to step in and salvage this economy.
Oh, it has already, because China is actually Venezuela's major benefactor right now. And on Wednesday, China's foreign ministry said that it believes the Venezuelan government and people can appropriately handle their own affairs, including the country's debt. Venezuela's cash-strapped government on Tuesday vowed it was making debt payments responsibly, even as 2 rating agencies declared partial default, as we just read. Despite optimism that payment will continue in the short term, investors believe the country will at some point be unable to service some $60 billion in junk bonds, potentially triggering messy lawsuits and worsening an already difficult economic situation. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang told a regular news briefing in that China's cooperation with Venezuela in all areas, including financing cooperation, was proceeding normally. Will you believe that Venezuelan government and people have the ability to appropriately handle their affairs, including the debt issue, Geng said, without elaborating. Venezuela has a public debt of about $150 billion, including $23 billion owed to China, according to the Washington-based International Institute of Finance, which represents some of the world's largest banks. What China is doing in their Belt and Road project is that they will go to a country and they will say, okay, we'll give you a bunch of money.
They'll bail them out.
We'll give you a bunch of money, so build yourself a railroad or build yourself a whatever. But this is a loan, all right? So China's loaned $23 billion to Venezuela out of 100. So that represents about 15% of their total external debt. And then the country builds an asset, and when they can't repay, then China takes over the asset.
Right.
So that may be what's happening here in Venezuela. I don't know.
I think so. They're making it's going to be a major stronghold in South America for China.
Yes.
Which is part of their strategy for 2050.
China, a good friend of Venezuela's, has brushed off widespread condemnation from the United States, Europe, and others about the situation in that country. In September, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told his Venezuelan counterpart at the United Nations that Beijing believes Caracas can resolve its problems within a legal framework and maintain national stability. China and oil-rich Venezuela have a close diplomatic and business relationship, especially in energy. Yeah, because Venezuela, it's oil. So actually, one of the problems that Venezuela has is that it made a deal with China where, China loaned money to Venezuela, and then Venezuela was going to repay in oil. And so that's what's happening now. So China's getting oil from Venezuela. And so, as far as they're concerned, everything's fine.
Probably at a very good price.
Yes.
I would think.
Yes, at a very good price, yes.
And, of course, the current rulers of Venezuela don't really care about the future of the country. They're depleting it of its natural resources. So in the future, what is the country going to have? Yeah, China's just using this as a tool to ultimately reach their goal of world domination.
Let's see what's going on in the Catholic Church. Some Catholic leaders are signaling resistance to the Pope's agenda. Let's see. This is again the Wall Street Journal. U.S. Catholic leaders signal resistance to Pope's agenda. But I thought he was a good guy. Archbishop Joseph Naumann elected chairman of the Committee on Pro-Life Activities in 96-82 vote. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops chose a conservative archbishop for a key post Tuesday, signaling resistance to Pope Francis's vision for the church among the Catholic hierarchy in the U.S. Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City was elected chairman of the Committee on Pro-Life Activities. In a vote of 96-82, he defeated Cardinal Blas Kupich of Chicago, who is seen as a liberal in the church and a close ally of the Pope. The vote breaks a long-standing tradition of the position being held by a cardinal, an unusual lapse of deference in a highly rank-conscious body, and suggests that Catholic leaders in the U.S. remain largely resistant to the changes Pope Francis is trying to bring to the church. Some experts say the slim margin of the vote shows growing support for Pope Francis's agenda. Others say it mostly reflected the tradition of a cardinal holding the post. Like all the bishops, Archbishop Naumann and Cardinal Kupich are both strong opponents of abortion and euthanasia. Archbishop Naumann said that he would keep the committee focused on these two issues as it had been in the recent years. Cardinal Kupich, meanwhile, indicated that he would have broadened the committee's focus to include other issues like the death penalty, health care, and poverty, a list more in line with the priorities of Pope Francis. The cardinal is a clear favorite of Pope Francis, who appointed him Archbishop of Chicago in 2014, then named him to the Vatican's Congregation of Bishops, which helps shape the next generation of the hierarchy. The Pope elevated him to the rank of cardinal last year. I don't know what this is about. That is where the U.S. Catholic Church, of course, has had a complex relationship with the Vatican for a long time. During Pope John Paul II also had problems with the Pope's anti-abortion stands.
Well, from what you read there, you could really see how centralized authority is a problem.
Yeah.
You have somebody that basically is kissing up to Pope Francis and immediately rises up the ladder, not through elections, not through democratic means, but through basically aligning yourself with the ruler. You have an incredible opportunity to go vertical. Whereas if you oppose the Pope, then you are marginalized. So this is always a problem with centralized organizations.
Where shall we go next?
I think an interesting article is how taxpayer dollars are also paying for surgery of military personnel.
Do you have that open?
Pentagon approves gender reassignment surgery for service member.
Why don't you open that and go ahead and...
Okay, so transgender service members get a gender reassignment surgery. Washington, an active duty service member has received gender reassignment surgery, the Pentagon said today, amid ongoing debate over whether transgender troops should be allowed to continue to serve in the military. Defense Department spokesman Dana White said the surgery was done Tuesday in a private hospital and was paid for by the military's health coverage, which is paid by the taxpayer, because the doctor deemed it was medically necessary. Medically necessary. Military hospitals.
I'd like to meet that doctor.
Military hospitals do not have the surgical expertise to perform this type of surgery. Therefore, it was conducted in a private hospital, White said, adding that because the service member had already begun a sex reassignment course of treatment and the treating doctor deemed this surgery medically necessary, a waiver was approved by the director of the Defense Health Agency. Army Major David Eastburn said the waiver was required and routinely approved for medical procedures that the military facility does not have the expertise to perform. So this is, this is something that's got to stop. Where if somebody wants to do that kind of activity, they should do it on their own dime.
Yeah. And probably after they leave the military. I don't know if we,
Yeah.
Certainly, we shouldn't have to pay for that.
Yeah.
That's really ridiculous. Let's read this. I want to go through this article on slavery in Libya.
Yeah.
800 says the auctioneer, 900, 1,000, 1,100. This is a CNN article. Sold for 1,200 Libyan dollars, the equivalent of $800. Not a used car, a piece of land, or an item of furniture, not merchandise at all, but two human beings. One of the unidentified men being sold in the grainy cell photo video obtained by CNN is Nigerian. He appears to be in his 20s and is wearing a pale shirt and sweatpants. He has been offered up for sale as one of a group of, quote, big strong boys for farm work, unquote, according to the auctioneer, who remains off camera. Only his hand, resting proprietarily on the man's shoulder, is visible in the brief clip. And after seeing footage of this slave auction, CNN worked to verify its authenticity and traveled to Libya to investigate further. Carrying concealed cameras into a property outside the capital of Tripoli last month, we witnessed a dozen people go under the hammer in the space of 6 or 7 minutes. Does anyone need a digger? This is a digger. Big, strong man, he'll dig, the salesman dressed in camouflage gear says. What am I bid? What am I bid? Buyers raise their hands as the price rises, 500, 550, 600, 650. Within minutes, it is all over, and the man, utterly resigned to their fate, are being handed over to their new masters. After the auction, we met two of the men who had been sold. They were so traumatized with what they'd been through that they could not speak, and so scared that they were suspicious of everyone they met. Each year, tens of thousands of people pour across Libya's borders. They're refugees fleeing conflict or economic migrants in search of better opportunities in Europe.
Or religious persecution.
Yes.
If you're a Christian in a lot of those African countries, you are being driven out of your homeland and being forced to relocate.
Most have sold everything they own to finance the journey through Libya to the coast and the gateway to the Mediterranean. But a recent clampdown by the Libyan Coast Guard means fewer boats are making it out to sea, leaving the smugglers with a backlog of would-be passengers on their hands. So the smugglers became masters, the migrants and refugees became slaves. The evidence filmed by CNN has now been handed over to the Libyan authorities, who have promised to launch an investigation. First Lieutenant Nasser...
Why you left?
First Lieutenant Nasser Hazam of the government's anti-illegal immigration agency in Tripoli told CNN that although he had not witnessed a civil action himself, he acknowledged that the organized gangs are operating smuggling rings in the country. They fill a boat with 100 people. Those people may or may not make it, Hazam said. The smuggler does not care as long as he gets the money, and the migrant may get to Europe or die at sea.
He gets paid in advance.
The situation is dire, Mohammed Abdikar, the Director of Operation and Emergencies for the International Organization of Migration, said in a statement after returning from Tripoli in April. Some reports are truly horrifying, and the latest reports of slave markets for migrants can be added to a long list of outrages. The auctions take place in a seemingly normal town in Libya, filled with people leading regular lives. Children play in the street. People go to work, talk to friends, and cook dinners for their families. But inside the slave auction, it's like we've stepped back in time. Not really, actually, because slave auctions, they're not a step back in time. They go on today. This is in Libya, but on Sudan. And this is, Islamic countries.
Yeah.
In ISIS it was happening, where women who were captured were being sold as sex slaves. And it's a normal part of Islamic culture. Maybe not,
It's in the Quran.
Muslims in the United States, but that's because, David Wood's in 3 stages of jihad. But in a Muslim majority country, this is a normal part of life.
Yeah. It's something Muhammad did, and it's in their sacred texts, and it's not considered a problem.
Right. Yeah.
In fact, if you study the work of Dr. Bill Warner, he is an expert on Islamic slave trade. Dr. Bill Warner, and he also documents the death by jihad. 270 million people have died at the hands of jihad, and a big part of jihad is slavery, sex slavery, work slavery.
Yes.
And it was not only what was shocking to me, it was not only black Africans, it was a lot of white Europeans were caught up into the sex slave trade.
Well, sex trafficking, is basically slavery.
Yeah.
Girls get into prostitution, boys get into prostitution, and their masters sort of create debts for them, and they say, "Well, we can't leave until you pay off your debt." And if you try to run away, then you can be severely injured, or in some cases killed. So slavery is very much a part of today's world. It's, I would say, most rampant in Islamic cultures, but not just Islamic cultures, unfortunately. So this weekend of the Ancestor Liberation, the king will be liberating the victims of Islamic jihad and Islam in general. So.
Yeah, 1,400 years of aggression.
Yes.
Most conversions happen through violence.
Yes.
That's the history of Islam. And many righteous Christians decided not to convert. And what happens in Islam if you decide not to convert? That is the death penalty. There
was the situation in Egypt not too long ago, a few months ago, where a busload of Christians was stopped by some Islamists, and one by one they got off the bus, and they were asked if they would convert to Islam, and those who said no were killed on the spot. And some were young children who were brave enough to say no and to be martyred for their faith. That's the reality that we live in today.
And these are the people that will be liberated this Sunday by the king.
Yes. Larry Pratt was saying yesterday that through history there have been a number of attempts by Islam to overrun Europe. And we're kind of seeing another one of those attempts today. And we need to liberate those. The king will liberate those people who went to the spirit world as a result of Islam, and we hope that they can help us to resist. There's the real resistance.
That's right.
there's the real resistance.
And there is this profound truth to the micro and the macro, where when the king does these kinds of liberation ceremonies or activities on the micro level, there's huge effects on the macro. Huge
effects. I mean, this whole thing with the sexual harassment and everything came after the elevation of the Han Mother. Soap, give me some soap. Wash out my mouth. The elevation of our true mother, Kang, to that position. And we've seen other cases too, it'd be interesting to see what will happen to Islam after the liberation this coming Sunday. Yeah,
I was reflecting a lot on it when the king made that announcement. I've been doing a lot of studying on the the advancement of Islam, especially before the Crusades. And, of course, we've all been brainwashed in the West that the Crusades were really caused by the Christians, and this massive amount of death was the result of Christian aggression. But when you really take an objective look at the preamble to the Crusades, it was really the Islamic jihadists marching into Europe, capturing pretty much all of Spain and going into Eastern Europe. And really the Europeans' backs were against the wall. They could either let this aggression and killing, slavery continue, or they could actually rise up and start fighting back. And that's what happened, thank God. Otherwise, all of Europe today would be under the control of Sharia law. And if anybody does any, even just surface study of Sharia law, it is really the kingdom of hell on earth.
And in terms of preparing for the coming of the Messiah, that was an important victory, important
critical
responsibility.
America would not be here today.
Would not be here today, yes. And I don't know how God would have found some way to send the Messiah, I'm sure, but maybe not in the time that he did, maybe hundreds, thousands of years later, we don't know, but it is certainly important that we resist the spreading of Islam and the takeover of Christian culture and other cultures as well, because it's also spreading in Korea. Because China, of course, China has its own. But anyway, we'll let China deal with its own. But Xinjiang is in the west there.
This is a modern-day crusade happening right now in Europe and also in America. So the king talks about this, and that's really why on the micro level he's really challenging all of us to take up the rod of iron and to train ourselves in martial arts and firearms, so that we can take our positions as kings and queens and defend God's nation.
Yes, we need to do that.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, we've come to the end of our broadcast. We thank everyone for tuning in today, and we pray that God will be with you, and that you can have a higher ownership consciousness of a Cheonryuk. Our families are the owners of Cheonryuk, but we're only owners if we understand what that means and exercise our ownership. So I hope that we can do that today.
Also, come this Saturday and Sunday.
Yes, come this Saturday and Sunday to Newfoundland, Pennsylvania.
Support the Second King.
Support the Second King, and join us for our True Children's Day and day of opening of heaven for the unified world of heaven and earth on Saturday, and for the ancestor liberation on Sunday. 7 a.m. on Saturday, 11 a.m. on Sunday. All right, well, thank you very much. We pray that you'll be, God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.